Hi folks, welcome to the channel. About 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, a new face appeared on the VC, one Chris Mawson, and for his first video for the VC, he chose a subject matter that's very close to my heart: essential prog rock albums between the years 1969 and 1974, which he considered the prime period for progressive rock, which you can't really argue with, though I probably would have extended it to 76, and even then there are later albums in the 70s that warrant the essential moniker. Anyway, it was a brilliant video. He made a lot of valid choices, gave really good reasons for choosing them, and the video took off. I mean, last time I looked, it had 17,000 odd views. It's probably well on to 20,000 at the moment. I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway, it was a great video. Well done, Chris, with your first one. I hope there's going to be more. But that was followed up by a response video from my great friend, Mr. John Bellamy. Now, he chose not alternatives, but additional albums that he thought could have been included. And he asked me what I would have done. So I've given it some thought, and I've decided to try and do a response video myself. Again, these albums I'm going to choose are additions rather than alternatives, because between John and Chris, they've covered quite a lot of the greatest albums, some of my favourites, so they haven't left much for me. Now, I've set myself some rules for this video. One, I'm going to stick to the 1969 to 74 time period that Chris set. I'm going to try and show 3 albums per year, so that's 18 albums in total, I think. Though I will be also, after each year, flashing up on screen some other albums that I think are worthy of inclusion. Being a massive prog fan, there are an awful lot of essential albums for me in the genre. I'm only going to show one album per band in the top 3. Because of that, I will possibly be putting albums in the sort of also rans, if you want, that could be termed, that are probably better than the ones in the top 3, but because I needed to get that band in there, I've had to relegate another one. It's difficult. Probably the last thing to say is that I have a very wide definition of what progressive rock entails. A lot of people restrict it to purely symphonic prog, and that's it. That's progressive rock. For me, progressive rock goes from symphonic rock to fusion to space rock to electronic music to the avant rock, progressive folk, a very wide range of experimental and weird music, if you like. So I think that's about it. Let's get started. So we start in 1969, which is generally considered sort of year zero in the prog world, with King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King being judged as generally considered as the first out and out prog album. Most of their albums before then are classed as proto-prog. Now that one's shown, so I can't put that in. So the first one I am going to choose from 1969, is Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention with their album Uncle Meat. Now, a lot of people might not consider Zappa as progressive, but if progressive rock includes virtuosity, which a lot of the definitions do, then Zappa and his bands had that in spades, absolutely. And if you wanted the melding of different styles and genres of music together in an experimental fashion, then that was Zappa. His music went from, and included on this album, from doo-wop to rock to classical to jazz and way out into the avant-garde. This is a brilliant album, covers a lot of different styles, and includes the wonderful suite, the King Kong suite on side 4, which has been covered by a number of different progressive rock acts, from fusion acts like Jean-Luc Ponty to the Finnish prog rock band Tasavallan Presidenti. So for me, Zappa is definitely progressive, probably the godfather of the American progressive rock, and warrants a place in the essential top 3 albums of 1969. Next up, we have Colosseum and their second album, Valentine Suite. Colosseum were formed in 1968 by drummer John Heisman and sax player Dick Hextall-Smith and keyboardist Dave Greenslade, along with, I think, Tony Reeves on bass. And at this point, we had James Litherland on guitar and vocals. As I said, this is their second album, probably considered about their best. Their Colosseum are a sort of jazz rock band with a variety of styles, rock, jazz, obviously blues in there, with lots of great soloing and interplay. Excellent band. After this, Litherland was replaced by Chris Farlow on vocals. He's a bit of an acquired taste, is Chris Farlow. I don't mind him, but I think this was the highlight for me of Colosseum. When they disbanded in 1971, Heisman went on to form Colosseum 2, or a more sort of electric jazz fusion outfit. And eventually he got Colosseum back together with Chris Farlow and others, and along with his wife, Barbara Thompson, on sax. Sadly, both of those have now passed away, but as I understand, the band is still going and have put out a new album this year. So I haven't heard that, but I think Chris Farlow is still in the band, along with, I think, Mark Clark, the bassist. Not sure who else is in there. But no, excellent jazz rock band and album. My third choice from 1969 is High Tide with their first album, Sea Shanties. High Tide were formed in 1969 and split in 1970 after doing their second album, though they did got back together a number of times. The main guy was Tony Hill, who was the only constant throughout all the lineups. He's an excellent guitarist. They were an important underground sort of hard rock, hard prog album, often deemed to be one of the first prog metal bands, if you like. The other big name at this point was Simon House, and it's his distinctive violins that provide a lot of the progressive instrumentality in this band. He went on to join Hawkwind and then later on played with David Bowie. This is an extremely heavy album, probably one of the heaviest of its era, to be honest, but well worth playing for that, as I said, for that interplay between Tony Hill's guitar and Simon House's violin. So that's my third choice for 1969. So, 1970. From now on, it gets increasingly hard to know what to include in the three choices and what to leave out. But we're going to start off with one of my favourite bands, and that is Soft Machine, one of the stalwarts, if not the most influential band to come out of what was to become the Canterbury scene. They were formed in Canterbury, obviously, in 1966, disbanded in 1984, but are still operating to this day. They were initially known as Soft Machine Legacy, and now they dropped the Legacy and are back to just calling themselves Soft Machine, though there are no original members left. They started off as a quartet with Robert Wyatt on drums and vocals, Mike Ratledge on keyboards, always the heart and soul of the band for me, Kevin Ayers on bass and vocals, and David Allen on guitar and vocals. David Allen had to leave fairly quickly when he wasn't allowed back in the country after a tour on the continent. So for their first album, they were down to the Wyatt, Ratledge, Ayers trio. And that one, the first album was very heavily influenced by psychedelia. By the second album, Ayers had gone to follow his own solo career and was replaced by Hugh Hopper on bass. The second album continued the psychedelia, but introduced more and more of the jazz stylings into the band's palette. By this album, third, which is generally considered their magnum opus, the psychedelia had sort of virtually disappeared. There was only one track, Moon in June, that harkens back to the psychedelic period of the band, which was Wyatt's last vocal performance with the band. This is a double album, which is more which is more jazz fusion. Still some, like I say, some of the psychedelic touches, but with also including sort of minimalist touches, particularly the Terry Riley stylings that Hugh Hopper would continue to use on some of his solo albums. The presence on this one of new member Elton Dean really pushes the jazz aspect of the band, and that's the route they would take going into the future. But this is a superb experimental jazz fusion album that everybody should really own. Now, anybody that watches my videos knows of my love of the whole krautrock scene. So, and for me, that's part of progressive rock as a whole. And so my first album from that scene that I want to include is Amon Düül's second album, Yeti. Amon Düül formed in Munich in 1968 as part of an artistic and political community just called Amon Düül. The musicians in the commune split to create Amon Düül 2, leaving the non-musicians, if you like, to call themselves just Amon Düül and produce a series of albums of just sort of collective free improvisation, fairly raw. From that one session, they got about 3 albums. This in 1969, Amon Düül produced their first album, Fallas Die, superb album, and possibly my favourite, but Yeti, their second album, is generally considered to be their best. Yeti includes some of their most impressive work, really, with multi-layered sound, dense instrumentation, epic improvisations, along with some of the more structured songs. This shows probably the full power of krautrock. Brilliant album. And sticking on the continent, we have an album that is very different from Amon Düül 2's Yeti, but I think warrants inclusion here, and that is the album by the Swedish keyboardist Bo Hansson, and his music inspired by The Lord of the Rings. Hansson came to prominence in a duo, Hansson and Carlson, playing up-tempo Hammond organ-based music. Did 3 albums between 67 and 69. They even came to the notice of Jimi Hendrix when he was touring Sweden, and took time out to jam with him. And even then later covered a track, Tax Free, that was written by Bo Hansson. This is Bo Hansson's first solo effort, and it's a beautiful, timeless album of instrumental prog psych. Captures the otherworldly pastoral feel of Tolkien's books perfectly. And it's a must for any collector of early Swedish prog, even if you're not a fan of Lord of the Rings. The album peaked at number 34 in the UK album charts when it was picked up by Charisma for release. And I think it was Hansson's only UK top 40 album. Like I say, a beautiful album. So, 1971, and we have 3 absolutely brilliant albums here. First up, again, one of my favourite bands of all time, the wonderful Hawkwind, with their second studio album, In Search of Space, or X in Search of Space. Came in this wonderful sort of die-cut, fold-out sleeve with the wonderful Hawkwind logbook inside, which I won't get out and show. Hawkwind obviously formed in 1969 in London. Probably one of the most famous underground rock bands ever. Still going to this day, thanks to the wonderful Dave Brock. They've gone through hundreds of different musicians in their period, and despite what everybody says, they've gone through different styles of music, from the sort of experimental and acoustic sounds of early releases to the metal era in the late 70s, and the more electronic sort of feel of later material. As I say, they're still going, producing wonderful albums even now. Their music often has more in common with krautrock than symphonic prog. It's largely minimal and trance-like, with lots of insistent rhythms, powerful riffs, spacey synth sounds all over the place, trippy, hypnotic. And for me, this is the pinnacle of their studio albums. Space Ritual would be in here if I was doing live albums. This point, they had Dave Brock on rhythm guitar, and Del Detmar on synth, Ditmek on audio generator, Nick Turner on saxes and flutes, Dave Anderson, ex-Armand Duel 2, on bass, and Terry Ollis on drums. This is an absolutely wonderful album. Should be in everybody's collection. I mentioned Armand Duel 2 and krautrock. Next two releases come from the krautrock scene. First up, we have the wonderful Faust with their debut. They were formed in Weimar in Germany in 1971, disbanded in 75, but regrouped in the 90s, and are still going to this day, though as two separate groups. Considered one of the most important bands to come out of the krautrock scene, and a progenitor for the industrial rock scene, thanks to their use of things like drills and stuff on stage. When they originally came together, their manager managed to persuade Polydor that they were going to be one of the next big things in rock music to rival, the Beatles. I think they were quite shocked when they heard this album, which is not really for the faint heart. It's a psychedelic experimental album, one of them, probably the most psychedelic experimental albums ever produced. It's full of distorted hard rock, psych, tape manipulations, dadaist humor, electronic avant-garde, yet it all comes together in a cohesive amalgam. It's a brilliant album. Like I said, not for the faint-hearted, but if you fancy something a bit more avant-garde and experimental, you couldn't do worse than check out Faust. And from Faust, we come to Can and their third album, Targo Margo. Again, probably considered their best album. I definitely think it's their best. Formed in Cologne in Germany in 1968 and disbanded in 1979, I think. Probably one of the best known of the krautrock bands. Their music is hard to describe. It's a mixture of free jazz, acid rock, chamber music, classical and minimalist musics. And this is a landmark album for them, covering a whole different number of styles. It starts off quite relatively accessible, but then gets to sort of stoned psychedelia like Mushroom Head and relentless 18+ minute grooves of Hallelujah and God knows what you'd call Aum and Pekino. those unclassifiable collages of music. Uh, you, at this, you'd have to. Sorry, tripping over my words. You'd have to pick out two of the members at this point. Damo Suzuki on those crazy vocals of his, sometimes whispered, sometimes declaimed quite forcibly, mixture of sort of stoned English and Japanese and a language of his own making. Totally unique. And the star for me, the drummer, Jackie Liebertzeit, with his sort of repetitive motoric drumming, which came to sort of define, along with Klaus Dinger, probably came to define the motoric sound of krautrock. Brilliant drummer. So, again, for fans of psychedelic avant-garde music, and if you like your superb rhythm sections and unusual vocals, go for it. And so we get to 1972, arguably the greatest year for prog rock music. So I'm going to continue where I left off in Germany with the krautrock scene. Chris, in his video, showed the magnificent Phaedra album by Tangerine Dream. The very first electronic album that I ever heard and bought, and still possibly my favourite. But I wanted to include Tangerine Dream in this collection. And so I've gone for their third album, the magnificent double album, Sight. This was the first album that featured the classic lineup of Edgar Froese, Chris Franke, and new boy Peter Baumann. What you have here is 4 extended, droning, dark, minimalistic soundscapes with no real evolution or development throughout the 4 sides. In fact, hardly anything seems to happen. The music is so minimalist that you're struggling to see the changes. But the idea is not to listen to it closely, it's just to let yourself be enveloped by the music. It's a magical, this is pre-Eno ambient music that's one just to let it flow over you. I don't think they ever did anything like this again. And it's a wonderful album. One scene that probably rivaled, or I think so, came close to rivaling the British progressive rock scene was that of Italy, where progressive rock really took off. And 1972 particularly, I could have chosen a dozen albums to be included in this top 3. So many great albums came out of Italy. But I have to go to probably the best known band that came out of Italy, and that's PFM, or Premiata Forneria Marconi. Formed in Milan in 1970. I first came across them with their English language album, The World Became the World. But then on a trip to Italy, I purchased the first 2 albums. Both of those were released in 1972, and there's not a cigarette paper between them. They're probably 2 of the greatest prog rock albums ever. But I'm just going to show the first album, Storia di un Minuto, which is arguably the greatest prog rock debut album of all time. This is typical of Italian prog rock, lyrical, melodic, romantic, delicate, full of finesse, but some sumptuous arrangements. They took their influences from bands like King Crimson and Genesis, but took it to a whole new level for me. This album contains some of their best known numbers. You have a festive, joyous, celebratory number that was actually redone as Celebration on their English language albums, which had their English lyrics written by Pete Sinfield of King Crimson. But you then get the two of the best rock numbers ever, Impressioni di Settembre and La Carrozza di Hans, and the absolutely beautiful Dove Quando. A must. Anybody that likes progressive rock has got to have those early PFM albums. I think they're still going today. Only a couple of sort of early members left in the band. I saw them live in Manchester pre-pandemic, and they were concentrated on the 70s albums. All the music was from those, and they were superb. So if you haven't already, check out PFM and other Italian prog rock bands like Banco Le Orme, New Thralls, anybody like that. Brilliant. And just noticed, been showing a lot of double albums, and I'm going to show another one. And this has been a massive favourite of mine since I first heard it in the mid-70s. But this is Aphrodite's Child 666. As you probably know, Aphrodite's Child were out of Greece, but were formed... They were formed by Greek musicians, but they were formed in France in 1967. They started off as sort of more of a psych pop, rock pop band, but by this, their third album, thanks to their main guy, Vangelis, who wanted to move into a more progressive area of music, they produced one of the greatest double albums in prog rock history, and one of the first conceptual albums. This is based on the Book of Revelations from the Bible, and this is an incredible music. It's hard to describe. It combines symphonic prog rock with psychedelia, Greek Orthodox religious music, touch of pop in places. He even had the infamous Infinity track, which is basically Irene Papas having an orgasm for 5 minutes. After this, this was the final album that the band did. Vangelis wanted to go in a progressive rock vein and became a famous, obviously, musician in his own right and composer of soundtracks, etc. Did some brilliant albums. The rest of the band were more inclined to move to, commercial types of music, and Demis Roussos, who was the bassist and vocalist on here, became that sort of housewives, kaftan-wearing darling pop singer in the early 70s. But so they never did anything like this again, which is a shame, because it's dark, it's funny, it's weird, it's amazing and baffling in equal measures. Absolutely wonderful album. And so we come to the penultimate year, 1973. And boy, do we hit the mother lode here. We start off with an obvious one for anybody who's watched my videos, as I consider this along with Close to the Edge, which I can't show because Chris showed it, as the greatest album of all time. And this is Magma with Mechanic Destructive Commando, their third album, and the one that really came to define their sound. Magma was obviously a progressive rock group out of France, led by drummer and composer and vocalist Christian Vander, superb drummer. Still active to this day. They were one of the few bands to actually create their own genre or subgenre within the progressive rock field, and that is Zeuhl, Zeuhl, which means celestial or heavenly in the language Kabayan, which they invented for their albums. I've described how when I first came across this, I bought it in a clothes shop in my nearest town, Whitehaven. The cover was sitting among the items of clothes in the window. They had a small rack of LPs just inside the door. I'd only just started getting into music. I was reading up about prog rock. I'm not sure if I even knew the name Magma at the time, but it looked interesting, so I bought it. When I put it on, I'd not heard anything like it at all. I had no terms of reference for what I was hearing. Wasn't even sure I liked it. But since then, it's become, like I say, one of my favourite albums of all time. As to the music, it's shifting riffs in odd time signatures, choir arrangements, heavy and distorted and pulsing bass guitar, both sort of bombastic and minimalist at the same time. Heavily influenced, I thought at the time, and from what I read, by the music of Carl Orff. It is just out of this world, and one that everybody. It's not an album for everybody. No, not really. A lot of people are not going to like the vocals in particular, but for me, one of the greatest albums ever created, and definitely an essential prog or any type of genre of music album. Next up, probably the most divisive album of the ones I'm showing, because not only did the critics dislike it, it's divisive among some of the fan base and even among the band members, and that is the wonderful Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes. Their sixth album, I think, at this point. This was the first with new drummer Alan White. It's another double album. I told you there's quite a few here, consisting of 4 20-minute tracks, all based on a footnote that John Anderson found in a book, The Autobiography of a Yogi. So it all centers on religious concepts. Despite the criticism that the critics gave it, and for a lot it's become it's become synonymous with the excesses of prog. BS, to my mind. This was a commercial success, becoming the first UK album to be certified gold on pre-order alone. You could argue nobody had heard it at that point. But no, this is one of the most magical and beautiful albums, recordings. They were really on a roll at this point, having just completed the perfect Close to the Edge. And after this, they were going to produce the equally magnificent Relayer. which John showed, so I can't show that either later. That obviously Rick Wakeman was not too enamoured of it, especially when they played the full album live. It eventually led to his leaving the band, but those three albums, Close to the Edge, Tales, and Relay, are the pinnacle of what Yes have achieved. Brilliant. And the third and final album from 1973 is another one that's quite divisive, Passion Play by Jethro Tull. This is my original second-hand copy, which was missing the booklet. It's a concept album based on the spiritual journey of a recently deceased man, Ronnie Pilgrim, his adventures in the afterlife. So it explores mortality, religion, good and evil. Most people would place, or most progressive rock fans would place Thick as a Brick as Tull's best album. And I love Thick as a Brick, and I think it's a brilliant album. And probably a more cohesive album than this one. But every time I listen to this, I find something new to hear. I even love the little sort of story that comes between the two parts. You know, the story of the hare who lost his spectacles. It's funny, it's charming. But this was my first Jethro Tull album, and is still by far my favourite. And so we come finally to 1974, and I'm going to start off with an album released in October of that year, and it's the fifth album by the band Gong, titled You. To my mind, this is the most musically adept album that the band did. Probably their most sophisticated album. A lot of jazz rock fusion in here, a lot of space rock. It's their most spacey album in total, yeah. Full of extended ethereal passages. You get great tracks like Master Builder, Sprinkling of Clouds, I Love Everywhere, and that brilliant closing track, You Never Blow Your Trip Forever. This obviously was, not obviously, but this was David Allen, the founder of Gong, his last album with the band until 1992's Shapeshifter album. The band is still going, despite the sad passing a few years back of David Allen, but he wanted the band to continue. On here, you've got probably the classic lineup, as well as David Allen. You've got his wife, Gilly Smith, the Shaktioni. David Allen, known as Dingo Virgin. You've got Mike Howlett on bass guitar, Pierre Malone on percussion, who would go on to lead a version of Gong under his own name. You've got Blumdido Gladdebrass on wind instruments, i.e. Didier Malherbe, Haiti Moonweed on synths, that's Tim Blake, and the great Steve Hillage on lead guitar, superb guitarist. So this is the third and final part of the Radio Gnome Invisible trilogy of albums following Flying Teapot and Angel's Egg, a trilogy which forms a central part of the gong mythos. To my mind, it's their best album, bar one. I have a great soft spot and love of Camembert Electrique, and I think for me that just edges it. But this is superb. Next up, we have the album Mirage by Camel, their second album. What can you say? They were a very melodic, lighter style of prog band. Never performed too many sort of over-the-top bombastic solos, but you get a lot of tasteful solos by the excellent underrated guitarist Andy Latimer. Lovely keyboard work from Peter Bardens. This is, again, like the Gong Xiu, isn't actually my favourite album by them. It's, again, just pipped by their fourth album, Moon Madness. But an excellent band. They were sometimes associated with the Canterbury scene, but I think that's mainly due to the short period when Richard Sinclair was in the band, and that did give it a bit more of that Canterbury feel. But an excellent band overall. And finally, I'm showing a band from the Netherlands. Now, I would have loved to have shown Focus, who were the gateway for me into music, not just prog music, but music. And I adore Focus. But Chris went and showed all three of their best albums. So I can't show them. So I am going to show instead a band with a Focus link, and that is Trace. Trace were formed by the keyboard player Rick van der Linden, who was in the band Exception before this, a band that sort of, whose whole shtick was playing sort of classical pieces in a rock, progressive rock format. Excellent band. But he wanted his own band and to play his own ideas, and formed Trace along with bass player Jaap van Eyck, who used to be in Solution, an excellent band, and also Pierre van der Linden, who is, I think, a second cousin to Rick, the superb drummer out of Focus. This is characterized by complex arrangement and intricate instrumental work, mixture of rock, jazz and classical influences. They recorded 3 albums during their career, of which I think this is the best. They're often sort of compared to ELP, but I think they're less bombastic in style, with a wider palette of keyboard sounds, I think, than ELP utilised. Highly recommended if you haven't heard them. So that's my choices as additions to the essential albums of 69 to 74. I'm going to just follow this up with some other albums from 76 through to 79. I'll show you some more albums I think warrant being called essential prog albums. So even if you didn't agree with my choice, I hope you found it interesting. And thank you, Chris, for starting this off. I thought loved your video. And I look forward to seeing more by you. All the best, guys. See you soon.